So, Dorothy, you're a professor of biology at Gordon College. Gordon
Yeah.
College is a liberal arts Christian college near Boston. What was your journey like to teaching at Gordon?
Well, I grew up in love with biology and the natural world,
Yeah.
and I've been a Christian for many years. When I was in college, I actually went to Gordon College, so I knew what a small liberal arts college was like. And I thought, from the time I was 6 till I was a junior, that I was going to be a medical missionary in India. And then at some point in that process, I asked myself, when you're doing what you want, what are you doing? And it usually ended up being walking around, looking at the natural world, and going and telling somebody excitedly about it. That's not exactly what my career is, but it's pretty close. So that's a lot of the fun of it. But I did do other things on the way. One of my degrees is in entomology, so I know about bugs. And then I did a PhD in oceanography and limnology. And limnology is the study of freshwater. And so I know a lot about frogs. So if you were under 10 years old, you would think I was just the coolest thing.
So if I were under 10 years old and you were telling me about frogs, what would you tell me about frogs?
I would tell you that some kinds of frogs can freeze into ice and then actually come out and hop away.
What does that mean?
When it thaws, they can thaw and be alive. Like you could not do that. You would be dead, but they're alive. And it's because they have special stuff in their blood that's like an antifreeze, anyway, it's cool.
Wow. Can you tell me a little bit about a current research project you're working on?
Right now, my focus is on trying to communicate with people of faith who are not scientists and with scientists who are not people of faith about common ground in caring for the environment.
So you've shared elsewhere that one of the things you feel called to do is to help heal the perceived rift between science and faith.
Yes.
Can you share a little bit more about that?
Well, some of it is through teaching because many students come to us and they've been put in a position where they've been taught that scientists are saying things that aren't true for a reason to leave God out of the process. And that may be true for some scientists, but it's not a globally true statement. And they've sometimes been taught things about how to interpret the Bible that don't stand up to a lot of theological, critical thinking. So one of the things I do is just model being a person who is a Christian and a scientist and doesn't live in a continual crisis. But I think that conflict model is not the only model you could have. So in my life, I don't use the scientific method to ask questions about God. And I don't look to the Bible to explain things that we know a lot of details about because we have technology that didn't exist when it was written. Even though I don't feel like there's a conflict in my own faith and scientific life, I do live in a divided world. There are people that are making very strong statements that say these conflict. So I always start from a position of love because the Bible says that if you don't love somebody, it doesn't even matter if you're right. When I approach anybody, I always remember that they are loved. And that's the place to start with any conversation about hard things.
You described that there are alternative models to the conflict models. We think about the relationship between science and faith. In your own life, in your own work, are there areas where your research, either your field work or other research you're doing as a entomologist, has actually informed and helped shape your understanding of God and faith?
One of the things that being an ecologist has done has made me have a much more complicated view of the natural world. And when I talk to Christians about their views of the natural world, it turns out a lot of people, without even having said this to themselves, actually believe that everything they don't like in nature came from the fall. And I'm just going to say it's not true. So the fact that we don't like things is on us, and I'm not going to go into anything about what the fall did to humans and the natural world, but just to say that there's a level of complexity in ecology. That means that when I approach matters of faith, I don't have a pat answer for anything.
So you wrote a report 7 years ago on the relationship between Christians and the environment and how Christians should think about the environment. Since then, what has changed on both the science of climate change and how the church has responded to that, some of those challenges since 2011?
I think you'd see that a lot has changed, and then some things haven't changed. So one thing that's changed is the science is even more compelling. And I don't know if you followed the United Nations report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change that came out just 2 weeks ago. But it's an interim report between their 5-year updates. And they basically said, folks, this is so real, and we have to make huge changes.
Yeah.
And that was specifically about climate change, but a report on the oceans in 2014 said approximately the same thing, very similar things about loss of forests in Brazil and that kind of thing. So it's all coming to a head where right now the evidence is very strong that there are really big issues that as a world we have to deal with. So that's on the science side. I think on the faith side, that's a very complicated question because there are the rise of groups like Young Evangelicals for Climate Action and Climate Caretakers is a group that sends out a prayer newsletter about it. Those kinds of things. Ed Brown's work with Care of Creation and the Lausanne movement work on that. That's a global effort. In this moment in American Christianity, there's a big division.
You've shared a couple of times in this conversation, I know a lot of your work is on the questions of climate change or climate change as actually an issue about poverty. Mm-hmm. And you've shared before that Christians have been known historically as caring for the poor.
Right.
How is climate change about caring for the poor?
Well, I think it's both about caring for the poor and then this fundamental part of ethics of fairness or justice. So one of the big trends is that around the world, the people that are most feeling the impacts are not the people that produce most of the greenhouse gases that cause warming. Yeah. So that's true in places experiencing prolonged droughts. That's true in places experiencing floods and droughts. And it's true in small island nations, again, that have sea level rise. Alaska has a lot of sea level rise and permafrost thawing issues. So that's a justice issue. But in addition, yes, just like you say, Christians have an ethic of caring for the poor. You see it in Matthew 25, where it's very clear that if you're going to follow Jesus, you have to treat poor people as if they were Christ himself. That's how you're to look at them. James, the whole book of James, especially James 2, talks about never treating a rich person better than a poor person. Well, we live in a world where that's an upside-down thinking, and we need to be upside-down thinkers to do that.
The work to be done around climate change, addressing the challenges of climate change, and how the church should be, and how Christians should be engaged in that work, can be complex. What are some ways that you would like to see Christians engage in that going forward?
To promote civil discourse in a way that we're having trouble with right now. I mean, to improve our general conversation. And that means that you can't talk about complicated things in sound bites. You can't answer questions in the 24-hour news cycle on Twitter or having angry people talk on the radio. That's not ever going to get us anywhere. So this isn't unique to climate change or any environmental problem. It's just a function of where we're at, where moderate voices have a lot of trouble getting heard, and the most polar voices get a lot more attention. And I would like to see that change.